Welcome everybody to our 7th SHIELD webinar. I can't believe it's 7 already. Anyway, we're very excited to have Heather come back to us, and Heather is going to, and whoever is not muted, please mute yourself. Let me share my screen. And I just like to always start our webinars just giving you guys an overview about SHIELD. And I just wanted to thank Heather for coming again. Heather has a very vast career working in solar wind structures, in solar wind properties, in CMEs. She worked in ACE, Ulysses, New Horizons, and Omni, and she has a vast interest. Currently, she's a deputy PI for SWAP, that is a solar wind around Pluto instrument on New Horizons. She's also co-I on IMAP, that is going to be launched in the next couple of years. She also is involved with the polarimeter and punch mission, and she is involved with our drive center SHIELD. So today she's going to come back. She gave actually the first webinar talking about how to write a good proposal. Today she's coming back how to give a effective, creative, and impactful scientific presentation. So before I switch over for Heather, I just wanted to quickly remind you that this is a phase 1 drive center called SHIELD. And SHIELD stands for solar wind with hydrogen ion charge exchange and large scale dynamics. It's several centers competing for phase 2. We're one of them. And the idea for us is to create a predictive global model for the heliosphere. And we are using observations, theory, localized kinetic and MHD models. So it's a pretty large center. And the main thing behind it is we are trying to create the groundwork to predict habitability. So this is our best chance. This is our only habitable astrosphere that we know of. And we would like to understand its properties to be able to extrapolate for other stars. You can check out our outreach. And in fact, if you just go to outreach now, there is a trailer that we posted. If you just click on this first tab, outreach, there is a link for a trailer that we posted recently, summarizing this amazing effort that we did on collecting testimonials from different grad students and their difficulties from, being a foreigner, being first generation students, being LGBTQ, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really inspiring. And I think this is one of the aspects in SHIELD that I get most zapped around it. We will have at the end a survey at Qualtrics, and Rachel, that is part of our effort, she is at the University of Alabama, of our outreach effort, is going to post in the chat a link for that survey. If you folks can fill it out, we thank you very much, because it's going to help us make SHIELD better. I just wanted to advertise that the next one is going to give continuation to the last webinar we had that is part of the series of Young Voices. We had Paris and Elena talking next month. It's going to be Emily from University of Arizona talking about plasma instabilities. So come back to listen to her. And then we're going to switch back to Latinx, Black experience in space physics. So there's many more exciting webinars coming. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and let Heather take over and tell us how to give a good presentation. Heather, all yours. Heather, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Okay.
Great.
So the title of my talk is A Path Towards Creating Effective Scientific Presentations. And the purpose that I wanted to achieve by doing this is giving people skills which they could use and take forward. Because if you're going to do outreach, I'd like to have a a purpose that can make a difference. And so the purpose of this presentation is to provide information to put you on a path towards creating effective presentations. And some of the topics, I'm going to talk about some ground truths, which I think can help provide insight that could make your presentations be more calm. And then talk about submitting abstracts, the audience, preparing and rehearsing, building effective content, aspects of the venue and delivery that you should consider, and fielding questions, what to wear, what not to wear. And also I want to really take a look at the high pressure presentations such as PDRs and CDRs. And then I'll have some additional information at the end. Kind of an overall philosophy to present. Here I'm presenting general recommendations that will guide you towards making well-received presentations and have professional interactions with people in the field. And some things to take into consideration are items in this presentation are not firm rules. So it doesn't, like there's not one way. So you can always do something that's a little bit different than someone else, and it's just fine. So don't think that you have to stick to a rigid set of rules, because that's not the case at all. You really don't have to do that. But there are some common principles that are effective. No one will give a perfect presentation. So you should not expect yourself to be perfect. You don't have to be perfect to be effective. And so I think that's one thing that can help provide you some calm, that you don't have to be perfect. You can make a mistake, you can recover from a mistake. And everyone, it doesn't matter who you are, makes mistakes and needs improvement in certain areas. When it comes to giving presentations, your work will be questioned by people in the field. People asking you a question is not a bad thing. And I'm going to go over a little bit more about that. You are the one letting people know who you want to become through how you prepare, the clarity of your message, and the delivery of your presentation and your attire. So some things that I tend to do when I'm submitting abstracts is I read the meeting description and the session descriptions. I choose the session that's most appropriate for what I want to present. Where possible, you should adjust your wording to fit in better with the session. Use a short title. Keep your abstract short and focused. Describe some results and conclusions you have, because if you have a result that somebody finds interesting and a conclusion that somebody finds interesting, they're more likely to choose you. And then relate your work to the big picture. Your work doesn't have to be solely addressing a big picture question, because often you're going to be working on a small piece, but you need to be able to provide the context of how your work fits into the big picture. Describe any key implications of your work. Explain in the abstract how your work is relevant to the session. Send a little bit of key relevant information or a plot or figure ahead of time to the organizers. And then I recommend requesting a talk. Talks tend to have better attendance, and good speakers are highly sought after. And often I always I always put down I want to talk, and because I try to tie into the session, I think I get a lot more talks than maybe is average because of these kinds of things. But all this work is well ahead. This is all done way ahead. So you got to start thinking about things really early on. A key thing to note are the number of slides. How many slides should you have? The number of slides should be equal to the number of minutes minus 1 at the most. You can do fewer, but don't try to do more than that. It just typically won't work out well. And then the number of key messages your presentation should have, it should be 3 or less for all presentations. I'm talking about the main points. You can have some sub points, but the points that you're really going to want to emphasize at the end should really just have 3. Now, if you have a presentation that's under 15 minutes, I would recommend only having one key message that you're trying to highlight. And this is a principle, and it's often referred to as the power of 3. People tend to remember things better when you do it in 3s. I guess, I don't know, maybe it's just something psychological. And then I put some links here. You can look into that on the web. And then another thing to think about early on is you want to know your audience. Your presentation should be geared towards your audience, and that affects the level of the material, the manner of the delivery, the formality or informality of the presentation, and the level of background material you include. If you get invited to do a talk and are not familiar with the audience, ask the person who invited you. Even for physics or laboratory seminars, it's helpful to know the subdisciplines that are common in the audience, because that will affect the background information that you include. How to start a talk. There is currently a debate in the community about what the first slide should contain. It's been common for a long time to have an outline, bullets stating what will be covered, but more recently there's been a trend towards doing an initial figure diagram with maybe some minimal background information. Either way, it's probably good to start with your main purpose or objective. So no matter which one of those options you do, it might be good to at least state your main purpose, because that's the main, there's going to be at least one overarching point that you really want people to hone in on. I would, make sure that that's clear from the very beginning. If you can give a brief outline and show a key diagram, that might be even more effective. If you make the outline bullets very brief, you can use those as section dividers in a long talk. And that way people kind of know where they are in your presentation. They know when you're getting towards the end, because they remembered, that you had these sections lined out on the outline.
Super.
Okay, we got some background noise. We need somebody
Yes,
has
thank
their
you. Yeah, Heather, please mute yourself and you will have time at the end to ask questions. Thanks.
Okay, some general advice. When you're preparing material, early on, you might want to put together an outline that you go over with your advisor and co-authors, and this should be done way in advance. And one thing I like to do is I like to fill in key figures and key result bullets early in the process. And then you can review this kind of skeleton version of the major content with your advisors and co-authors before you get to the point of doing the final presentation. And this gives you an opportunity to change things before it gets too close to the end. You don't want to be making too many content changes down to the wire, because you really want to go over your presentation in more detail and do a lot more restructuring, organizing, and cleaning up of the text, and adapting some of the figures to make them more effective later in your process. And so when you go back and edit, some things to look for to make sure your purpose is clear at the beginning of the talk. And then at the end, you want to relate your summary and conclusions back to back to your purpose. And then you want to make slide text primarily bullets and not paragraphs. And so you want to go back and edit things. And I mean, the first draft, if it's longer, that's fine. But as much as you can do bullets, the better. Practice makes perfect. well, there's no such thing as perfect, but you definitely improve. And that's why I put perfect in quotes. Practice with your advisor and co-authors before before like your rehearsal time. And then practice the pace at which you speak and time yourself during practice. Distracting habits. Everybody has them. It doesn't matter who you are. You have habits that you'll do during a presentation that you are things that you might want to avoid. And so I took a class on giving presentations, and the advice from that class was you need to identify some of the issues you're having giving the presentation. And I'm talking about things like saying and like as a filler, like a placeholder word, and shifting your body weight around, or shifting to an informal position. Like if you put all your weight on one hip and you're kind of tilted, that's seen as being more informal. Speaking in a monotone voice. If you're trying to make people more, excited about your work, you do not want to speak in a monotone. And so you want to go up and down some, and that helps highlight key parts of what you're saying. You want to avoid pacing back and forth too much. That just is going to make you look nervous. Even if you're not nervous, you'll be perceived as nervous. You want to avoid clenching your fist. This tends to make people speak in a monotone by clenching a fist. So if you have a pointer in your hand and a clicker, don't clench them the whole time. You want to leave your hands a little bit open so you can do some gestures. A lot of people tend to get thirsty during presentations, and so you need to take that into consideration. Issues with posture, are you too stiff or are you slouching? You probably want to avoid leaning on the podium in case something falls off the podium or the podium shifts. And then using colloquialisms. If you make a list of these things, what you can do is just kind of mentally review the list before you give a presentation. And this was the advice I got from the person that was teaching the communications class. And I thought that this would be a terrible idea. But I actually went and tried what she said to remind myself ahead of time of the things that I do that are annoying. And I did it, and I was thinking it was going to make me more nervous. And what it actually did is it made me notice when I was doing it. And even though I still did those things some, I reduced the number of times I did it. And in the class, we did have a guy who was speaking in a monotone, and the lady that was teaching the class, she told him, can you please do your presentation of this one slide again, but don't hold on to the pointer, set the pointer down. And so she had to do present that slide again, not holding on to anything, and his monotone disappeared. And I thought that was some amazing magic, that just clenching your fists, your hands into fists, can make you speak in a monotone. So that to me, wow. And that was one thing that was really surprising to me. And then some other general advice. You'll want to do a final round of edits at the end, and with an eye towards trying to be more focused and streamlined around your main points and convey your main points better. You'll want to convert sentences to bullets as much as you can. Move detailed material to backup slides that you can use during questions. So some material, it'll just be too detailed to do it, to present that material, especially if you have a short presentation. But somebody might ask a question about it, so you can just put it as a backup slide. And then focus on what you did and what you know is also helpful. You don't want to go on a tangent, and if you focus on what you know, the presentation will be stronger. What you know and what you did, your contribution, you focus on that. That's what you know the best, and that's why you've been asked to give this presentation, because you have done something that people are interested in. This is one that turns out to be important. You want to wear business attire. It is better to be overdressed than underdressed. You will be meeting potential future employers, and in particular, the U.S. Government agencies employees tend to wear formal business attire. And so that kind of sets the tone, because a lot of people in our field are getting funding from government agencies. I mean, actually, that's the major source of funding in the field of space science. And you think it might not make a difference, but what happens is, depending on the way you dress, can convey how people will see you in a different light based on your attire. And you would hope that it wouldn't matter, but unfortunately it does matter. And I have, towards the end, I'm going to go over this some more in more detail, but I'm going to move on with some other topics. So some key things to note on figures and diagrams. You want to make make your figure. You want to simplify your figures and make them streamlined for presentations to highlight your main points. You want to use color and color scales strategically. You want to add labels and indicate key features you discuss on the plots. And you want to make the figures the star of the slides they are on. And this includes making the figures large, reducing the amount of text on the slides, increasing the font size of the labels. You may need to remove labels and retype them in PowerPoint to make them bigger. And you want to remove portions of plots that you're not going to discuss, because that's just going to take away from people understanding your main points. Here I have some examples of some conceptual diagrams. Two of these are from Jack Gosling. Was always really well known for his diagrams. Here you have like a coronal mass ejection loop, magnetic field loops that he's talking about. You get a reconnection, and now you have a flux rope here. And then this is another diagram he did on reconnection, and he has the flow direction on the exhaust material. He uses this kind of diagram when he goes back over his data analysis. He relates it back to the flow diagram. Here's another one that's just showing how the New Horizons spacecraft is cutting across a schematic of the interaction between Pluto and the solar wind. And so, it looks like there was a bow shock and a plasma pause, and then the spacecraft entered a region where it saw some really heavy ions that were coming from Pluto itself. And then here's an example. This is one from a graduate student that we have at UTSA from one of his recent papers. He wanted to put some context for some average values calculating. And so what he did is he drew the different regions. He's got the magnetosphere, the low latitude boundary layer, current layer, magnetosheath boundary layer, magnetosheath, bow shock, and solar wind. And then he gives the different average results that he got in the different regions. So it's just a nice way to kind of lay out some numbers that could have just been in a table, but he's putting them into context of where those numbers are. This is another diagram by Gleckler et al. And it was an interesting situation where there was a coronal mass ejection and a CME, and the coronal mass ejection affected the tail of the comet such that if the coronal mass ejection hadn't passed, then they wouldn't have been able to detect the ions from the tail of the comet. And so it ended up being a weird geometry. And so since the geometry was kind of weird, what George Gleckler did is he put this diagram together. And so he's got the sun, he's got the coronal mass ejection coming off the sun. He's got the comment tail here, and then he's kind of schematically showing how he thinks that the tail gets diverted so that it can be, the ions can be detected by the Ulysses spacecraft. Here's another really good diagram by Craig DeForest. He shows a magnetic cloud here, which has a cavity. And then he shows there's some more closed loops here and some open magnetic field lines here. And then he's showing another diagram using the same color coding over here at a later time. And you see the draped field line configuration here. And this is the heart of the magnetic cloud. And this is where the sheath regions develops. And he's using these schematics to explain what he sees in the images and the time progression that happens in the images. And what and then also in this paper, he looked at some in situ data and he put a bar across the top with the same color coding. So he used the same color coding scheme throughout the paper. This is another one by Craig DeForest, where he has the images and he labels the different regions, and he marks them on top of the images and adds labels. And then you can see the time progression of how things move through this set of stills, because in a journal article, it's hard to present a movie. And so I think it's good to add labels and circle regions and put bars that indicate that you're in a different region or across the top of a plot or something to help guide people's eye when they're looking through images. And so you can convey more meaning if you add an extra layer labels, region. And so this is a McComas et al. Figure. He has solar images here and here, one showing a solar minimum configuration and one showing a solar maximum configuration. And then what he's done on top of it is he's plotted the solar wind speed, but he's done it in a polar format so that the distance from the center is the speed. And then the latitude of the spacecraft is done in a clock angle, so that when the spacecraft is above the poles, you see that the speed is really fast, and when the solar wind gets slower and more variable when you get down to the equator. And then also at solar maximum, you see that there are a lot more structures and it's more highly variable all around the whole sun. And you see that the streamers are spread out, all across the sun too at that time. And then he went back and he related it to what's happening in the progression of time. And so this half is more like solar minimum. And so that's the solar minimum configuration. And this is solar maximum. And this is the configuration of solar maximum. So this is relating it to the time profile of the sunspot number in the solar cycle. There's also a lot of other ways to look at using color and carrying color scheme throughout a presentation or a paper. I looked at identifying how steeply the solar wind rises and falls as a way to identify compressions and rarefactions. And so if how steeply the speed rose as a function of time, the speed time slope, if it went above a certain value, I colored it orange, and it went below a certain value, I colored it blue. And then I used that same sorting when I went and looked at the temperature versus speed. And so whenever it was rising, it's colored, the points are colored orange, and whenever it's falling, it's colored blue. But part of the problem is that there is some overlap, in this same temperature speed space. You get one population that does partially overlap with the other population. So then looking at these two populations separately and binning, you can get also binning can show more of what the trend, even when you have variability, you can see if there's a trend more clearly here. And then if you take this bin result and this bin result and you overlay them, you can see how much the populations overlap and how distinct they are a lot better. So you could take, you could basically show this time series and then this last figure, and you could cut out this figure and this figure when you're doing a presentation. So by adding in binning and sorting and then tying the sorting to coloring, you can reduce the number of plots and make your points more clear. So this is another example of using coloring to make your points more clear. This is from a paper in 2005, and I did some different sorting, looking at times, criteria that, if I used a bunch of different criteria, if I said, oh, it could be a CME if it met any one of these criteria, and if I said that you had to meet several all had, so you had to do 3 criteria instead of just any one criteria, then I got this likely population, and then this is what wasn't a CME. And then, but if you overlay the non-CME and the CME and you do two different colors, you show that yeah, a lot of CMEs are very cold, and they're a much different distinct population. And so this figure was from another paper, the Matthews paper that I helped Bill with. So another thing, you can, instead of doing a scatter plot, you can bin your data and then color code it. And there are some situations where that would be important to do. So this is a paper from 2012, and I was looking at temperature versus speed of the solar wind. And this is 1 year of observation, and I've removed the CMEs here. And so, but what I noticed is you have your slow wind down here, and then you have a fast wind population. But then in 2003, there's like a break. The fast wind doesn't fall along the same line as the slow wind. And this was, a lot of this material was from polar coronal hole extension that extended down to low latitude. And it was much faster than you typically observe. And so there is some reason as to why this would happen. And then in the literature in the past, people hadn't done a lot of sorting and didn't really look at the progression in time as much and so some people said, oh, everything is just, all falls along one curve. And then some people said, no, that the high-speed wind can behave differently. Well, it can do both. But there's a reason behind it. It has to do with the properties of the individual coronal holes. Is it more like a polar coronal hole, or is it more like a small, isolated equatorial hole? So if you had different populations and you wanted, different groupings, but you're kind of trying to still go with a scatter plot type format, it'd be good to show the color so you can see the breaks. Like here, there's not as many points here, and you can see there's kind of 2 populations, and then here you can see that this population is shifted down. So here's another example I did, looking at temperature versus speed observations. Again, I've removed the CMEs in this one, at different distances, with Helios close to the sun, at 1 EU with ACE, and then looking further out with Ulysses. And what I noticed is you have this heated population that develops with distance. And so this is a reason why you would want to show the color, because you see that this population just doesn't really show up in these, and that you have a sharper break between the fast and slow and close in. And so, but if I also went back and did some one-dimensional binning and also added in the sorting, and then now you clearly see that this population is a compression, is material that's been compressed and heated, and that explains it. So this is an argument from binning and sorting, and also showing things in terms of color binning as well. This is an example of why you'd want to use different color scales. So these are observations from ion observations from New Horizons when it was near Pluto. This is a standard spectrogram format. of our secondary detector count rates. And then it's just on a rainbow color scale. And so you see more intense counts here when we're you know, a little bit closer to Pluto. And then, so what we did is we used the ratio of the secondary to primary rates to determine whether we wanted to use the red or the blue color scale. And the reason being the ratio of those rates we knew would have one, you know, would be in a certain range when it was light ions and in a certain range when it was heavy ions. So we use that to sort it, but we're still plotting the secondary rates, but we use just two color scales. So the blue is for light ions and the red is for heavy ions. And this lets you understand the data better because what you notice is that you see more heavy ions when the spacecraft is in this tail, and the heavy ions are coming from Pluto, whereas the light ions like ahead of it, you know, were solar wind ions. Another reason to maybe use a different kind of color scale is here, this is a plot of percent error. And I'm using a red to blue color scale because white, which is in the middle, would mean you have zero error. And so I kind of was wanting to indicate when we don't have error, because we're trying to look at requirements for an instrument, and we're required to take good measurements inside this box. And so we're doing, the errors are much lower inside the box. And so you need to choose your color scale for, the way you choose, the color scale you choose can help you make more points clear. Okay, so this is an example where we had done a flow diagram of how, you know, inputs like density, speed, and temperature. I'm trying to forward model the count rates that an instrument would see. And so I have a Maxwellian distribution with a given density, temperature, and speed. And I add in some instrument responses and instrument settings, and I output a simulated count. And then this GPA means I'm just processing the data like I would normally process the data, and I get an output. And then here I go through this process of how I create error map plots, like similar to the one I showed you. And then I test doing some corrections. And so I had done this color coding, and I'm going to use this orange, yellow, and green color coding to help highlight where we are on the flow chart. So this is kind of an advanced technique that you would carry through a presentation. And so here I have the kind of plot that I had on the flow diagram is shown for orange is shown here. The one for yellow is shown here, and the one for green is shown here. And so you can have a meaning that's carried by a color throughout a presentation. And then here I did an overlay to show like where the probability of being at a certain temperature and density in the solar wind. And so like, you know, like you can see that, you know, where the solar wind is plentiful, we're doing well, and that's within the required range. So some key things to know are about the venue. You want to kind of map out where you're going to be in the conditions. And so you need to figure out like if they're going to turn the lights off. And so like at AGU, they often turn the lights down and it'll be kind of dark. And so you want to, it's nice to check it out ahead of time and look for hazards like cords that are on the floor. You want to check to see if the podium is next to the edge of the stage, because it often is at AGU. And then you want to note if there are any feet for a screen sticking out, so that if it's a presentation where you can walk, where you're standing right in front of the screen, you might trip on the feet. I've seen this happen. I think I've even almost done this. And then you also will want to locate the pointer if there is one, and the keys you'll use to do your to change your slides, or find a clicker. If you're using a clicker, you want to find all that out ahead of time. And you want to also identify if the setup needs to be changed for you. Like, are you going to need to adjust the microphone? Do you need, like, sometimes there's like a viewing screen where you can see your slides, and you might need to move that screen. And so you'll want to identify that ahead of time so you can quickly make those adjustments. And if you go up before the presentation or during a break, you can work with the conveners so they know what changes need to be made. You'll also want to identify if the room is hot or cold and adjust, the extra, add and subtract extra layers or clothing, as appropriate. And then you'll want to identify things about the microphone. Is the microphone volume set loud or soft? And then you also want to find a place to sit so that you can quickly get on and off the stage. That's another thing. Some other things about preparing of the day of the presentation: make sure there's some water if you need water. Sometimes people get really thirsty doing presentations, and then you may need to bring water. There might not be any available, but so you need to scope that out ahead of time. You're probably going to want to use the bathroom ahead of time. Sometimes when people get stressed, this can trigger a need to use the bathroom. It's like a flight response. It's a common biological response to stress. Test ahead of time or during the break that you can connect your computer if you're going to need to connect your computer, or if you've added your slides into a computer system ahead of time, make sure that they're there and that they display properly. And then it's also good to ask the moderator to give you a 2-minute warning. And then you want to have a plan ahead of time that when you're towards the end of your presentation, you want to have a way identified to speed up your presentation. Like you can simplify some of your explanation, or you can skip one slide and still make it to the end and have it be fairly coherent. Also, another thing to do, it's good to go up in advance or during a break and say hello to the moderator and let them know how to pronounce your name and what you look like, because often when they're doing a transition between speakers, they're looking for you. And our field is very international, and it's hard for everybody to know how to pronounce everyone's name. And so it's good to do those kinds of things to help make things go smoother. And here's some advice that's specific to talks. You want to say hello to people at your session, maybe beforehand your talk or during the breaks. Introduce yourself. Get your advisor to introduce you to people in the session, because these are the people that are doing the same kinds of work as you. Practice your talk with a laser pointer if you'll be using one during the presentation. If your hand shakes while you use the laser pointer, briefly turn it on to point at something and then let go. Don't keep holding on to it, because if you keep holding on to it, it's going to show every little movement of your hand. And that's typically how people get the shaky laser, is they keep holding on to it. Another reason not to hold on to it: if you hold on to it, you'll accidentally turn it on and be shining it into the audience. Another key thing is with talks, it's even more important to streamline the content. So you definitely want to use bullets and move anything that's not super critical into backup slides, or something that's a little bit tangent, move it to the backup slides. If you have trouble looking directly at people, look at the back wall just barely above people's heads. They will think you are looking at them if you do that. You don't want to keep scanning the room, because that can be distracting and make you look nervous. But you can look, slowly look around the room at different people. Sometimes it's good to look at somebody that you know, because it can make you feel more comfortable. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, this is really important for talks. Identify ahead of time parts near the end of your talk where you can be more brief and leave out some material if you're running out of time. Mention at the end of your talk that you're interested in new collaborations and would be happy to speak with people afterwards. Now, this is something I've added in some more recent years. And adding a statement like this at the end of your talk can make a huge difference in getting people to come and talk to you, and to seek you out at the end of the session or during the breaks. And I was surprised by just adding a statement like that. It made a huge difference. And that when people are coming to you, it makes it easier for you to form collaborations. Some specific advice for posters. Say hello or nod at people that make eye contact with you walking down the aisle. These are people that are often interested. Introduce yourself to people, shake their hand, maybe not with COVID, don't shake hands, but and then ask what kind of research people do and where they work. That's a good way to kind of get started talking to someone. If you are doing a poster, often there's more graphic work that has to be laid out in a specific way. So you might be working with a drafting support team. And if so, you need to engage with them really early because it takes time for them to do stuff. And so in particular, sometimes it's hard to lay out things on a giant poster form. And so you might need help with that, but that means you have to start all of your work earlier. Make sure font and background have enough color contrast. This is often an issue with posters because often the plots are laid on top of a background that might be a picture or a diagram might be in the background or something. And so you have to work hard to adjust the color contrast, and you may need to put some like transparent boxes that reduce the contrast a little bit underneath your text boxes so that you can still read the text. You need, for a poster, you need to be prepared to give your poster in several ways. You need to be able to do a long version, a short elevator pitch version, and you need to be able to do a version where you jump to the main point. And this is for people that are in your subfield. They don't want the long version at all. But they still might be interested in a lot of your main points. And so they don't want the elevator pitch version either, because then they're gonna skip some key points in that version. Another thing is just take people to your poster, have your advisor bring people to your poster, learn who does similar work in the field. And if you see them, ask them to come to your poster. You can go get a drink and bring people back with you to your poster. And this is a technique you should not underestimate. There's a reason they have beer and coffee, and that's where people tend to congregate. And if you don't bring people back from those locations, you might not get anyone. So you need to kind of advocate for yourself some. Posters get a lot of questions, and you can have friends, family, classmates, and advisors ask you questions to kind of prepare you for that. Talk to people you know at your poster, even about something else. If people see other people at your poster, they tend to take a closer look. Fielding questions. It doesn't matter what you do in a scientific and technical field, you will be asked questions. Typically getting questions means people are interested. If you're a student or early career researcher, your advisor or coworkers will help diffuse heated questions from competitors that have an agenda. To give yourself time to digest a question and make sure you really know what's being asked, repeat the question in your own words. If you really don't know the answer to the question, just simply state that. If you know how to go about getting the answer, but cannot have a final answer on the spot, then state the steps you will need to take. That's a good way. If you know the answer, but the full explanation is long, provide some basic information or reference, and ask to speak to the person in the break or afterwards. If you think the question has a hidden agenda, take a breath, speak in a more monotone voice at a calm pace. Be upfront about weaknesses and strengths of your work. Do your best to support your rationale for your methods and conclusions. And you may not be able to fully address this, but these are some basic steps you can take to help diffuse a heated type question. If someone has a valid point, acknowledge that, but do not be afraid to also discuss things that may have not been considered that you have addressed. So sometimes when people look at your work, they may not realize that you've tried out 10 things and you're presenting the thing that works the best, but you don't have time to talk about all that. So sometimes they're just kind of shooting off the cuff, and you actually do know more because you did all these iterations when you're doing your work, and but so you can allude to that. Another thing that people should be aware of, you need to think about safety at conferences, and the best advice I can give is use your street smarts on outings during the meeting and at the meeting. Use the buddy system. Often conferences may be in places where you're not familiar with the area, and you're not used to navigating that area. There's safety in numbers. The buddy system also helps you meet people in the field as well. And I actually mean, this is not just for women. This is also for men, because like even in AGO, if it's in San Francisco, some areas right outside the conference area are pretty rough parts of town in San Francisco. So it's not just women that have to worry about this. If you need help managing a problem at the meeting, get help from organizers or someone you trust, such as your advisor, other professors, coworkers, and other colleagues. Drink alcohol in moderation. A good way to moderate alcohol consumption is to drink water in between alcoholic drinks. Make sure you complete all your travel authorization paperwork well in advance of a trip. Official travel paperwork is typically linked to the insurance coverage in case you have an accident. I know we've had students that have had accidents, and luckily they filled out all their paperwork, and the cost of the healthcare to deal with that injury was covered because all the paperwork was filled out. Also, having your formal paperwork helps you if you need to adjust your travel plans in case of bad weather, flight delays, and natural disasters. And so, basically you need to know the policy of your university or employer. So PDRs and CDRs, the stakes are higher for these types of presentations. So a PDR is a preliminary design review or critical design review. So typically you'd have these for like instruments on a NASA mission or a whole entire NASA mission. Or if you're building equipment, like you're building a lab setup, there might be a design review. And so because the stakes are higher, and also since a lot of our funding comes from government agencies, attire becomes more important. You need to wear, in these situations, you need to wear very formal business attire. And then practice and formal rehearsals are extremely important for these kinds of presentations. Your work may hire a red team and gold team to conduct formal rehearsals, which is basically a set of reviewers that they pretend like they're the real reviewers to prepare you. And then ask your red team and gold team for advice on addressing weaknesses. They're paid to help you and have typically signed non-disclosure agreements. You need to time your presentations during rehearsal. And while you're doing the rehearsals, you need to have someone set up to write out a list of weaknesses that are noted in the rehearsal. And then you need to incorporate recommendations from the red and gold team. And in preparation for the final PDR and CDR, you will want to go ahead and have responses for some of these weaknesses. Some of them you'll end up incorporating into the presentations, and some of them will go into backup slides. Another thing that is different about PDRs and CDRs is you need to speak in a calm voice with a measured, moderate pace, and you need to reduce the level of pitch changes in your voice. You do not need to speak in a complete monotone, but you don't want to have a lot of tone changes, your pitch going up and down a lot, because this can activate your audience. And you need to do this during a science talk, but if you do too many pitch changes and you're in a design review, this can alarm the reviewers. If you get a question, or statement that is worded or it's spoken in an aggressive, hostile manner, you should pause, take note that you need to remain calm, repeat the question or comment, but do it in a way that's calm and and do it at a slower pace. This helps diffuse that comment or question. And then you want to refer to any backup material you already prepared on that. And then you want to refer to your teammates. They can help you give a good response. Do not be afraid to say that you will respond later. This is part of the design review process, there is always a predefined time so that responses can be given later. Sometimes it's at the end of the day, or sometimes it's later in the program development for that project. Like it could be a month later or a few months later. And then you want to be upfront about known weaknesses, calmly state your plans to address those weaknesses. So you should, the things you know about that are weaknesses, you need to have your plan for how you're going to handle those and work around those ahead of time. And then I'm going to go a little bit over.
Heather, just to let you
yeah.
know, we have only 4 more minutes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to skip the more details of attire then. But one helpful thing to, so I kind of outline, you don't really need, like at science meetings, you can go with like, kind of a less formal business attire, but for the important meetings, you want to go with the regular business attire. I find the show What Not to Wear very helpful. And those are just some more, and then I have some background information that you can look into on your own. And and that was all I had. So I was actually close to the end.
Sounds fantastic, Heather. I remember, by the way, that I used to, at the beginning, wear suits and everything to be ready for the battle, but I will wear funny shoes because that remind me that keep my sense of humor. So keeping my own personality. So I don't think there is a right or wrong answer, but I think what makes you feel more, I think together with yourself. Folks, anybody has, we don't have a lot of much more time. Anybody has a quick question for Heather? Kimberly had an interesting question here about colorblind audience, and I don't know the answer for that.
Yeah. So one thing is some of the color bar scales have a lot of green in them. Like an IDL 39 has a lot of green. I think 33 is a rainbow scale that's not half green, whereas 39 is half green. So there are some color scales that are designed to reduce some of the problems being colorblind. You can overlay contours on top that have some numbers. And in addition to a color scale, you can do some fixed increments instead of like a ton of colors. You can just kind of do some discrete colors. So there are a few ways around that. I try not, if I have an accent color, I try not to use both red and green because the more common form of color blindness is red-green.
Any other question? We have 2 minutes to the top of the hour. If you want to email Heather or us, we'll be happy to give you tips and advice as well. Remember that everybody's nervous giving talks in general. They're better than just faking it.
Yeah.
I used to play my favorite music just before a talk, no matter what. Again, to remind me, what I really love in life, and it will calm my nerves before giving to talk.
It looks like Nick has his hand up.
Nick.
Yeah. So thank you for a very nice talk. One of my troubles with some talks is sometimes people throw up figures. So you showed a lot of great examples of figures and some classic figures like the Ulysses plot. But how much time should you spend on or devote to a figure like that when you are balancing your time? Especially something that has a sort of unique layout.
Yeah. Well, sometimes if there are multiple parts of the layout, like if you stacked it, sometimes I will show the pieces and then build it up. And then if I know I'm going to use that format multiple times, then I don't walk through the format each time, but I kind of just go through what the format is once and then go from there. And then sometimes I will just point to certain things on the figure to highlight what the point is. Even if people don't understand the detail, they understand the point that you're trying to make. So that's another way.
Okay,
I know.
folks, that was fascinating. I have my own stories about talks, but we can leave it for another time. How to diffuse attacks and with
Yeah.
sense of humor and style.
Yeah.
So this is an art, so we should reserve it to another time. In any case, remember that you are the expert of your science more than anybody else in the audience. Remember how much you love what you do. And I think this, at least for myself, gave me security and a fun thing to
Yeah.
go and give talks.
I mean, I think knowing that you're going to make mistakes, but kind of have strategies for dealing with them and having all this extra preparedness really helps. And then you can have things in backup just in case. If you're nervous about something, you can have more detail in backup, but that doesn't have to be in the main presentation.
Okay, folks, wonderful. We were recording and put it in the website. And I see so many people saying thank you. And the thank you is all for Heather, not for myself. She is a star.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I will clean these up and I'm going to make the slides available too.
Yes. So, thank you so much, Heather. I like how Heather break into these details to try to remember that I will have forgotten even to mention if there's cables on the floor, but this is a very important point. Okay.
But no, it really,
it's
I've
true.
seen
No,
people,
I know. I think it's a great advice. And also
those feet on the screens, they can really stick way out. I know I tripped pretty badly on one once, and
Folly GU is overwhelming. And there are pretty sketchy areas. I agree with you. I was completely overwhelmed first time.
I've seen the podium almost fall off the stage at AGU.
Yeah. Okay, folks. So join us in, and Nick has a happy hour going just after that. And if you're interested, contact Nick or myself. And please come back next month for the Shield Young Voices given by Emily Lishkov by Arizona. What?
We're also looking for people to do some testimonial videos about how they got interested in the field and
right,
to tell their story as well.
Yes, and we've been sending posters to try for you guys to contact us or talk to us and about testimonials. Okay, folks, this is it. The survey is up again. Nick, you put the, yes, Nick put the Zoom link for the happy hour. Okay, bye, folks.
I put the registration link for the happy hour, so I don't know what the Zoom, I don't actually have the Zoom link. Well, I guess I do have the Zoom link, but you have to register, right?
Exactly.
Okay, and then the, somebody want to throw up the Qualtrics link for the survey?
Rachel put it right at the beginning.
Okay.
And I can send it again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Great.
Okay, folks. I am putting it again and see you next time.